realize that any gaming fiction you want to write, if you're working on your own games, I think a lot of this will be applicable to what you're working on as well. But there are some things that are going to be specific to writing tie-in gaming fiction. How many of you are interested in writing stuff on your own games as well? So pretty much everybody, on top of writing for stuff like Robotech and Battletech and Shadowrun and other stuff like that. So just to introduce me a little bit, I've done fiction or game writing in a whole bunch of different games for a whole bunch of different companies. Battletech is the one probably I'm most known for. I've done 5 novels in that universe. I've written for a lot of the source books and some of the game boxes and things like that. Robotech as well, Shadowrun. I've done some with Star Wars and Fantasy Flight games, and then some of the smaller companies like Gallant Knight Games, and I've done some tie-in fiction for Beam Saber, which is another award-winning indie game, and a whole bunch of others. And I really like doing it. It's a whole lot of fun, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of fiction. I'm trying to figure out the right distance with the mic so it doesn't reverberate back for you guys. Is that about okay? Okay, good. I'm used to just being right in the mic. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to try to buzz through this as quick as I can and leave as much time for questions as I can at the end. But if there are any questions during, don't hesitate to raise a hand or a finger, and we'll get to them as we go. One of the things that is important in IP writing, in writing game fiction, that's important to remember is that you work for them. And so a lot of this stuff in gaming tie-in fiction is that all of your work is work for hire. All of it is going to be something that you turn over to them. All of it is going to be something that they own. It's going to be something that they're going to have the final editorial control over. So if they decide at the last minute to change something, if they decide at the last minute to break that perfect scenario that you created, if they decide at the last minute to change the name of one of your characters, they get to do that. And you need to be very comfortable with that sort of thing. The first novel I wrote for Battletech, so before I came on to writing Battletech, or while I was coming on and sort of getting my sea legs in the universe, but before anything I'd had published, they had run a Kickstarter. And one of the things that they run on their Kickstarter, and you'll notice in games, there are lots of Kickstarters, even with the big companies. One of the things that they'd given away was that people could canonize themselves or their characters in the universe and give little biographical bits of information. And they had me write my book, my first novel in the universe, and I created my main character, and we went through approvals. I went through my first draft, I went through my second draft. We were literally 3 weeks from publication when one of the line developers said, hey, listen, can we change your character's name because there's a Kickstarter backer character that has the exact same personality as your character. And your character is very unique, and I really don't think we're going to be able to slip this character into anywhere else in the canon. And I was like, I don't know why you're asking me. It sounds like you're going to do it anyway, but here's what it breaks. And I explained that, I named the character's name was Diego Bailey. And throughout the entire book, there's this sort of Zorro motif, right? He's Diego, right? Diego de la Vega, which was Zorro. He calls his mech Toronado. He speaks in Spanish idioms. So it's got this whole sort of Zorro subtext, and he's sort of this guy who acts very charismatic, but when it comes down to it, he's got this alter ego where he's fighting against the status quo and his clan. And they're like, yeah, I get that, but we're not going to be able to put him anywhere else. So his name is Archer Pride now. And I'm like, okay, it's your thing. And that's just something you got to put up with. And people love that character now, and they keep asking me when his follow-up novel is happening. I don't have an answer for that either, but it's just important to remember that that kind of stuff can happen, and there's not much you can do about it. So you work for them for better or for worse. I love working with them, and sometimes stuff like that happens, but it's good to remember that. And even when stuff that you're very protective over happens, it's still theirs. One of the things to remember when you're working for someone else in their game universe and you're writing fiction for it is to remember what the overall goal of the line is and what the product is, right? When I'm working for BattleTech, ultimately my goal is to help tell stories that helps them sell little miniature battle mechs that makes people want to fight with them, right? Like that's ultimately what the goal is. I need to make people think, wow, that's really cool. I want to fight with these characters. And sometimes they get mad at me, and I've had to readjust this, where I'll create a one-off character that fights in a really obscure mech that's been out of production for years, and it'll get really popular, and they'll go like, we don't have any plans to put that mech in production. Why did you do that? And I was like, I did not expect that. And they're like, well, now we're drowning in email asking when we're putting this mech into production. So I've tried to be more conscious of keeping up with what's coming out in the product line to keep the mechs that I'm using in concert with what they're actually putting out. And every product has a different goal, right? So when I'm writing fiction, I'm thinking about that kind of stuff. This book, Legends 2, I did a bunch of work in it. And the goal of this book is to create like story hooks for the characters playing the role-playing game. So I need to think about the difference between that and the fiction, where the fiction is more to get people interested in the tabletop mech game. This one's more for the role-playing game and to give people hooks for the stories to go in there. So you're writing from a different perspective depending on what the product's goal is. Other things to think about are the word counts, right? In this book, every character gets one page, so you've got to make sure you've got to tell the story or the thing that you want to do in that exact word count, because the layout is going to be the same page after page after page. So you've got to get very comfortable with the cadence of that word count. If you're going to do, there's probably 40 characters that have stories and bios in here, and they have the same bios for each of their mechs in here, and they're all about the same word count. And we probably had, there's probably 10 writers on there, so we all had between 4 and 7 each. You've got to hit that same word count every time and not make it feel the same and do the same thing. So you've got to know professionally just how do I tell a story differently every time but still make the same word count and not complain about that, right? Like hitting your word count is very important. Knowing the goal of the product is another thing.
Have you tried sticking the whole thing you're putting on one page into an appropriate LLM and say, we need this to be 500 pages? Does that read?
So
500 words, does that yield
they give you the
results?
word count. They'll tell you what the word count is. So when they outline the book, they say this needs to be X amount of words beforehand. When you're working on stuff like this, they've got a product developer in charge of it that says, here's your assignment, here's your word count, go. And if you're the sort of writer who's always going way over your word count, and they've got to cut it down, you're not going to be working for that developer for very long, because that just creates more work for them. And if you're turning in stuff that doesn't meet the goal of that product or that line, you're not going to be working for them, because they're going to have to be doing that work over again anyway. So you have to really understand the core mechanic or the idea of the game and the world, and what the players are going to be using the product for. Because the line developers are really in tune with that. Typically, line developers on games are really in tune with how the game functions and how the players are going to be using it. So you can't really phone it in with them how they want to see their products used by the players. So you've got to really be in tune with them. And if you've got problems with it, they're happy to talk to you about it. pretty unanimously through every line developer I've worked with, through every company and every product I've worked with on, they're happy to like, hey, can I get on a call and talk to you about what it is your vision for this is, so I can deliver the right product, or the right words that you want, and that's always better than turning in what they don't want. So just the different types of tie-in fiction that I've worked with generally would be stuff like novels, short stories, in-universe nonfiction, biographies of characters, scenarios for games, timelines for the universe, hints and tips for GMs, non-player characters, characters and story hooks, meta content just for things overall that players can utilize. And I'm going to kind of go through some examples of them and kind of give you some idea of how they function and kind of some of the nuance that you can insert into them, because there's some really elegant ways that you can insert 2 or 3 different functions into some of these, because what you want to do is inspire the player to get 3 or 4 ideas, or the game master, right? Like you want to inspire someone who is a player of the game or who might be constructing a game to get excited about playing the game, or excited about building a game for their friends, right? Like the reason we're all here is because we like playing games and we like running games. Otherwise we wouldn't think about writing games, right? Who's here that wants to write that doesn't like playing games? That'd be pretty silly, right? So the idea is, I mean, how many of you have had that moment where you're flipping through a source book and you read something and you're like, holy smokes, that would be the coolest game, that's the coolest hook, I'm going to play that game with my friends. Like we've all had that moment, right? That's what you want to try to do with every bit of writing you're doing for these source books. Whether it's that NPC that you're throwing on the page, or whether it's a character biography, or a bit of in-universe nonfiction, or whether it's a novel. So I'll use Robotech as a case study because I've done like almost everything except for a novel in Robotech. So in Robotech, which is this book here, I did this for Robotech, the Macross Saga, and then Homefront, which is volume 2, which covers season. This book, the goal of this book was to take all of the Macross Saga and distill it into a book where you could hand someone who'd never seen the Macross Saga, and they would have all the information they needed to play a game that felt like watching the TV show without having to watch the TV show. So it would have all the information about the universe, it would have the tone of the cartoon, and it would have all of the background information on all of the characters, the vehicles, the universe, and the story, and it would have a story breakdown of every episode so that you could insert your characters into every episode, or any episode that you wanted to. So my job was to distill, I didn't do any of the game design on it, my job was to distill the cartoon into material for the players who might not have been familiar with the story. So I had to do all of the background material on the characters. So this is the character biographies. And this is where going back to other source material, like we were talking before the panel, helped. So for Breetai or for Rick Hunter, I went back to not only the cartoons, I went back to the comics, I went back to video games, I went back to the old role-playing games, and I sort of collected all of that information because my secondary goal was to try to make this a tome that, even if you're not a role player, if you're a Robotech fan, you might want this as sort of a collector's item of information of people who are just interested in having all the information about the characters, but that buried in each of these, there might be something in the backgrounds of each character that if you wanted to use one of these characters in your campaign, there are things buried in there that might be useful for you as a DM or as a player to play on. in this game, one of the things that's really important and I think unique is that I think people, if you're not familiar with Robotech, it's a soap opera, right? And the social aspect of people having to agonize over a girl liking them or not liking them is a central part of the show, and it's also a central part of the game, is all of the drama and the interpersonal drama, not just about romantic relationships, but like, does my commanding officer like me or not? Did I just piss off the commander? Did I just call the XO an old sourpuss and like get in trouble? You know, that sort of thing. So all of that drama is very much on the page in here. So putting all that drama in the biographies was really important. So thinking about the game mechanics and having all of that stuff there and being able to put it in here felt really important. The next thing I was doing, this is sort of fluff writing, right? So right here on the left, this was from the skill pages. So this was, on the far left here is the skill star power, or fame, and it shows you how to use fame as a skill. And they wanted to put that on its own page, and this was like the last skill on this page. And so they had this big gutter here. And one of my jobs on the book was to go through and fill all these dead spaces and say, they would say, okay, here's this page, write something in this flavor text, this fluff, that fits here. And so I would have to look at what was there contextually and try to figure out something that would fit, that would give the players some indication of how this skill might be used. So using star power there, I used something, I put some words in Min-May's mouth and had this interview with her about how her star power went and how she might use that skill, but in her own words. Another one, this was, in the chapter headings of each chapter, they had all this dead space, and they asked me if I wanted to do something ahead of each chapter. And this was the introduction to the book. So I decided to write from the journals of Admiral Rick Hunter, looking back at the first time he encountered robotechnology. But having to come up with something contextually on the page of everything that was going on and having to do that sort of writing. And again, trying to introduce people who might not be into the show what it might be like encountering robotechnology for the first time, so they can intellectualize that for their characters the first time and help people get into their characters as they're playing the game. Was something very heavy on my mind, specifically with this entry, to try to put them in the frame of reference of what it would be like to actually be boots on the ground in the Robotech universe and try to ground them in it. I had to do a timeline, right? Which was interesting, trying to put together an alternate timeline of everything that happened in Robotech, because it sort of diverged from our timeline starting in 1995. And again, this was, how do you create these moments that your players can play in, and make sure that you're writing it in a way that gives them opportunities to weave in and out of, so that they have a sense of time scale, and give them an opportunity to play through and have that knowledge, right? I talked to Bill Slavisek, who did the Star Wars West End role-playing games. And when they originally got the license, he realized how little of this kind of stuff Star Wars had when they got the license. And he was like, yeah, they told me to just make stuff up. Like, nothing had a name. And you kind of forget that, like, you need so much world in order to populate a role-playing game. And going back, I wrote a three-part series in Star Wars Insider maybe 10 years ago about this with Bill's interview, where all of the vocabulary we have for Star Wars actually came from the role-playing game, because they just had to make it up in order to create a viable role-playing game. So like, all of that stuff was because of the role-playing game. When they started making the EU, the thing they sent to Tim Zahn and Mike Stackpole and all the guys Kevin J. Anderson, was a box of all the role-playing stuff, because they were like, that's all of the vocabulary we're gonna start using. So role-playing game of fiction is actually really important for a lot of world building. Some of the other stuff is they would have me write one-page stories. This was me going back to some of the wells of the books. Jim Lucino was one half of the writing team that wrote the novels under the name Jack McKinney. Brian Daly was the other half, and Jim was really grateful with it. He was really helpful with his time kind of explaining to me how they did that. But some of them I expanded in the book, but they just asked for X amount of words of like material to kind of give different aspects of things. This one over here on the left was me actually kind of giving players the idea. It's from the Battlecry video game that came out on the GameCube with Jack the Giant Killer, the character who ends up actually missing the space fold maneuver and staying on Earth, and the story of Earth there. So I made sure to include all of that extra content. And this is Claudia Grant's journal. So like characters that we didn't see but are supposed to be playable in the game, imagining their story so that if players want to play like the bridge crew, they have some idea how to do that, trying to fill in that extra stuff. And then building the scenarios. Like I said, I had to do this with every episode. So I had to create the story of what happened, who the major players were, how those scenarios would play out. And then every one, I had to create a designer note about what different tools the GMs could use in order to make the scenarios really fun, right? So like this one, this is when they're over Ontario, ready to explode. And some of it's like keeping the clock ticking of the omnidirectional barrier system's overload looming, but it doesn't necessarily tell them exactly when it's gonna blow. And then it will explode at the most dramatic moment. Whatever you decide on, make sure it's the most dramatic thing for the story of your game, right? Like reminding the GM that doesn't have to happen at a specific time. It needs to happen when it's best for your players. Other times I would tell them, like, if your players haven't seen the show, don't give them the answer that they came up with on the show. See what your players come up with, stuff like that. Because I think sometimes people get locked into what they saw on the show. And just having to break down everything, it was a really interesting challenge. And then having to do short stories. And again, putting the players in fiction situations that in very short amounts of time, that just put them in the headspace of players, or who could be players, so that they get an idea of what a first-person experience in the universe can be like. And that's so much of what the players need to get into the universe, is to understand what it's like. That was one of the hardest things about some of the role-playing games that I was playing when I was growing up. Star Wars was very easy to get into because you could feel how the universe would operate for just about anybody. But some of the other games I used to play, again, we were talking earlier before the panel about some of the role-playing games we used to play, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was really hard to play, not just because the rules were incomprehensible, but because, like, what do you do once you make your characters and you're not the turtles? Like, what's the inherent adventure that your characters go on, right? Like, what's the story thing that your characters go on? If I'm a mutant animal who just mutated out of the zoo, like, what is it that I automatically want to do with someone who's a fan of the Ninja Turtles? Like, I don't have a Master Splinter, I'm not in the sewer, like, I don't have the Foot Clan after me. How do I construct a story out of that? And so having stuff like this in the book would have helped to really kickstart the imagination of players to help put them in that first-person scenario of what things they could do if they're not the main characters of that show. And then doing stuff like this. So I did this alternate scenario idea, coming up with things that you could do outside of the confines of the show. And we did 2 pages of this, just giving them alternate ideas outside the confines of the show. You know, playing during the global war. There's stuff that happens off screen in the opening credits of the first episode that you have all the tools to play in the game. You've got all of the weapons and the material to play before any of that happens. Or, you know, maybe the SDF-1 doesn't go to Pluto. Maybe the SDF-1 goes to Mars, and that changes the whole scenario, right? Like, a whole bunch of different ways to play it, giving them ideas to do that. You want to arm your players with as many tools as you can, and, you know, why not throw as much at them as you can? Shadowrun's a different issue as well. This is Augment. This is the brand new Shadowrun magazine that started, actually the first issue came out today. And I have 2 columns, 2 regular columns in it. It's going to start coming out quarterly. How many of you are familiar with Shadowrun? A few of you. Shadowrun is a cyberpunk fantasy mix. So it's got like all the cyberpunk stuff you'd expect, but all of the fantasy races and magic. It's been around for 35 years. And I have 2 columns. One is a politics column. So it's basically, I wrote a guy that's basically Hunter S. Thompson in The Sixth World, who goes around and just sort of bumbles his way through protests and corporate espionage and complains about stuff. And the other one is a big troll who does product reviews. And both of them are 2,000-word columns. And the idea is to cram as many different story hooks as I can into those columns. The magazine's told entirely in universe, so I have to adopt the voice of these other characters in them. And with the product reviews, it's really interesting to talk about like the companies that are making them and why they might be making them and how people might misuse the products, or why the products might be valuable, and to put those story hooks into ways you can use the products. The products are usually like, this first issue, it's all like cyberware, like fake eyes and cyber limbs and things like that. And it's, the last one in this issue is like this implant that's supposed to like increase your intelligence and your vocabulary and stuff. And looking at it in a source book just on its own, it's like, how are you going to use that in the game? And so I picked that specifically because I thought I could make a really interesting use case out of it through the lens of the review to show you how you could use it in a really interesting way in the game. So all of it, the entire column, became a way to show examples for the players how you can play this stuff and incorporate it into your games. And this is an entirely fiction magazine. You don't need it to play the game or anything, but it's a supplement, and it's keeping in mind that idea that what you're doing is helping people who play the game come up with ideas to help spice their game up, to help give them that moment where it's like, oh, I'm totally using this in my game when I am reading this and want to bring this to the table later. Tie-in novels. These are a little bit of a different beast, right? Tie-in novels are something that, with a game, change the game a little bit, because with source books, with the actual tabletop games, they don't change the universe much. They establish the universe and show you what it's like, but tie-in novels actually sort of move the timeline forward, at least in BattleTech and in Shadowrun. They move the timeline forward, and they actually sort of change the status quo for the players. So you've got a little bit of a different responsibility there. And again, you have to understand what the goals for the company are versus your goals as a writer are. And the goals for the company, I've definitely had books where they've come to me and said, that first book where they had me change out that character, they came to me and said, this is the first book in our new era where we're heading toward Clan Wolf. This might not make any sense, but I'm going to say it anyway as though it does make sense to all of you. Clan Wolf is finally making its bid toward Terra, and they're going to become the Ill Clan, and they're going to conquer Terra. But the Jade Falcons are going to be coming after them, and your book is going to have a Jade Falcon who doesn't believe in the Khan of Jade Falcon's Mongol doctrine because it's totally brutal, and it's going to have him balancing the difference between being a good soldier and being a good person as they evacuate their occupation zone, as they take all of their resources and pack up and move to Terra as they race to try to beat Clan Wolf to do it. And that was all the direction I had for the book. They didn't give me a planet, they didn't give me any specific character, they didn't give me any direction beyond that goal. And however I got there was my choice. So once I had to take that in, my goals became, okay, how do I make this an interesting story? How do I make this a story that I care about telling? How do I make this a story that is interesting to me? This book, Voidbreakers, it just came out a couple weeks ago. For me, it was, we were at a story summit where they have 4 or 5 of us writers and the line developers and the owner of the company get together at a hotel, and we just plan out the next 5 or 6 years of Battletech. And myself and one of the line developers were just off to one side of the room, and we were talking about one of the story points that just needs to happen. And as he was showing me on the map of the universe, what would need to happen travel-wise for this one specific story point to happen, I said, oh, that's a spy thriller. This is a James Bond movie right here. And he goes, do you want to pitch that? And so their goal was like, I don't know how to figure out how to make that story work. And I said, oh, I know exactly how to make that work. And then I pitched this because I was really excited about writing a James Bond thriller in Battletech. And so that's where this book came from, and they really liked it, my idea, and I just had so much fun writing it. So I balanced their goal with my goal, because you never want to not have fun with this stuff. You never want to be like, why did I take this job? Why am I doing this? This is the most miserable thing of my existence. Because it takes a long time. Like, it takes so long. The process is so long. I wrote this book that came out 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago. And the book that I wrote, I wrote 5 books last year. And the first one that I wrote, last year might not hit till the end of this year, maybe next year. It's a long process. And I'll probably go through editing on 1 or 2 of them this year, a couple of them next year. It's just a long piece of your life to work on tie-in fiction like that for tie-ins for games. Robotech was 2 years between starting on it and it coming out. So don't work on anything you're going to be miserable working on. I felt really grateful getting to wake up every morning and go like, oh man, I'm going to watch some more Robotech and I'm going to do some writing. I was working on a job for the Lucasfilm Story Group at the same time, so it was like I'd wake up, I'd work on Robotech for 2 hours, then I'd work on Star Wars for 2 hours, and it would just be like I was living my dream. It was the best. So yeah, like, don't work on anything you're going to regret, because you're going to be working on it for a long time. And yeah, like, again, the point with it though, also, the ultimate point, the goal was to complete that story point that they needed to complete for their overarching meta plot that they have for the universe that they need to advance the story for the players, because it creates interesting story points for them to play their own games in the role-playing game and on their tabletops with the miniatures game. But also it's to help sell the minis, right? So again, keeping in mind what minis are coming out, what minis are, what miniatures are already out, what miniatures are on the horizon, to make sure that I'm incorporating that kind of stuff to make sure that people are going to be able to find them. I got yelled at so much. I created a mercenary unit in the magazine, Shrapnel, and I told 5 stories with them across 2 years, and I gave one of them a mech that just didn't come out for like 3 years. And there's 5 mechs in the unit, and I had so many people emailing me like fan letters going like, this is great, I love these guys, but when does this last mech come out? When does this last mech come out? I've got everything except for this last mech. And people were finding them, there were original mechs that got made in the FASA days in like pewter, like 30 years ago, and they were going and buying them on eBay for like $50 to finish their lance, and they were getting mad at me for the cost, and I was like, I'm sorry, when I created that lance, I didn't know. Like, I'll be more careful about it next time. So you just gotta be cognizant of that kind of stuff. That's a broad overview of like the general different types of tie-in gaming fiction. And so we've got like 7 minutes or so. Let's leave it for questions. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a fire hose. But that's, I think, a general cross-section of the different types. And the sort of the different angles you're gonna be attacking it from, at least on the fiction side. Trying to support the gaming side.
Working with some of the smaller publishers and things like that, did you have to initiate that contact, or did they reach out to you on that?
Sometimes both. Sometimes some of the smaller ones will say like, I'll get in conversations with some of the smaller ones, and they'll be like, oh man, it'd be so great if you could write for me, but I know we couldn't afford you. And it's like, I don't know, try me. Right? Which happens more and more. Well, they'll do that soft ask. And it's like, I don't know, it depends. Do I like the project? Like, if it's going to be fun, my price will drop. If it's going to be miserable, my price is going to go up substantially. But some of them I'll go after and ask. There's definitely some books where I'll just pursue relentlessly, and they might not be tie-in fiction or anything, right? Like, last year I heard they were doing an anthology of Remo Williams stories, and I was just like, I'm going after that. So I got to write a Remo Williams novella. So like, that was rad. It was. So yeah, I go after the stuff I really care about, and then the stuff that I'm willing to be interested in will come to me. And stuff that I'm like, that Beam Saber one was just, they came to me and they were like, hey, would you be willing to do this? And I'm like, well, what are your rates? And show me the world. And they showed me the world, and they told me what they wanted to do. And they said that they wanted me to introduce this new part of the world they were opening up in their indie game. And the game had won some awards, and they were paying pro rates. And they gave me the constraints of what they wanted to do for the short story. And I didn't think it would be very hard. And it was fun, and they were paying pro rates. So it was like 2 days worth of work, and it was a lot of fun. It hasn't come out yet. I did it a year and a half ago. Hopefully it comes out, but I got paid one way or the other, so. But yeah, like really it comes down to whether or not they think they can, right? Like all the stuff I do for Galentine is usually like, it was something where, how did I get into Galentine? I think I did a panel with Alan here. And we just kind of hit it off. And then we met again at a different panel. Maybe we met at Gen Con. I did some Battletech stuff, and he was like, hey, I've got a mech game, and you're doing all this mech stuff. Do you think you could write a novella for me in his Mechs and Monsters game? And I did that, and it won some awards, and he was like, can I just keep paying you to like write stuff for me? And so it just, so much of it's like building relationships too.
What do you feel like when something gets canned and it's not gonna, like how do you process that kind of stuff? I know some writers that have written for like Magic the Gathering and stuff, and then they found out that their stuff's never gonna see the light of day? Like, what does that feel like?
I've definitely done I mean, like, I was pitching and writing stuff for Battletech for like 2 years before my first thing actually came out, and all that stuff that I'd done beforehand, like, it's not usable because, like, the story went a different direction, and it was like, it was a sunk cost, right? Like, because you don't get paid for pitching,
Yeah.
right? Which kind of sucks, but it did let me spend 2 years building a relationship with them. And most of it, I'd say about half of it, was stuff where they were teaming me with Mike Stackpole and we were gonna co-write it. So it was like, that was worth an experience in itself, like co-writing with Mike Stackpole and bouncing ideas and building a trilogy of stories with him, even though they didn't happen. That was sort of an education on its own. So like, I didn't feel too bad about it. Like, I got something out of it. And he and I have a great working relationship. Like, we just turned in our script for the first, we're co-writing the Battletech graphic novels. So like, it was not wasted time, even though they didn't use any of that stuff. That stuff would have been rad, but, and there's definitely, I mean, there's other projects that like I feel awful about. I shouldn't talk about them, but they didn't happen and I feel bad about them. But you just get back on the horse and keep working on the next thing, right? Like, you keep so many irons in the fire that like, if one of them falls out, there's more to worry about. I'm perpetually I've got too many irons in the fire, so it's like, if one of them falls out, it's like, it's not like there's not something to do. Anybody else have any questions? You guys can keep asking questions. Yeah.
So, have you gotten offers that you haven't turned down that you were like, I'm not really interested in this at all?
Oh, constantly. And usually I'll try to recommend folks I know for it. I'll definitely say, I don't think I'm right for this, or I don't have time for this. You should try so-and-so. A lot of times I'll try to turn it down and say, like, I really don't have time for it now. And they'll come back and say, oh, that deadline was just sort of arbitrary. If I gave you an extra month, would that be okay? And they'll come back and then, being upfront about how much time you actually have usually works in your favor, because they'll come back and say, oh, that doesn't have to be a hard deadline. What if we gave you more time? Can we do that? But yeah, no, I say no all the time. I understand that's a very privileged position to be in, but after you kind of have a reputation and people know you can work pretty well, pretty fast, I don't really miss deadlines, and so I get people coming to me with really absurd stuff, like, hey, can we get this article like Monday and it's like Saturday afternoon? Those are the ones I tend to say no to when it's like really absurd, but I also tend to say yes when I actually can, which is why I get a lot of those offers. This last holiday season, like, I want to say like December 12th or something, the fiction editor at Catalyst came to me and said, hey, the marketing team wants to give away a free Shadowrun Battletech short story on Christmas. 8,000 words, 5,000 to 8,000 words. Can you do those? And I'm like, when do they have to be in? And he was like, it's Tuesday. Can I get them by next Tuesday so we can get them edited for Christmas Eve, the Tuesday after? And I was like, what do they have to be? And he sent me the cover of the Shadowrun one, which already had my name on it. And I was like, well, what's the cover for the Battletech one? They're like, I don't know, we haven't worked it out yet. And I'm like, well, what's the stories for either? Do you have any? Just Christmas Eve. Just go. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I turned over 2 8,000 word stories in a week, and had a lot of fun with them. And so like having that reputation of being able to hit those absurd deadlines tends to get people coming out of the woodwork going like, so I have an absurd deadline. Can you do that? So yeah, like having a reputation and knowing people will get you people coming back for that kind of stuff. But I do say no.
How long did it take you to write those two? Well, I think how long did you like actually spend on writing all of that?
I'll write 2,000 or 3,000 words a day. I mean, this is my full-time job, so like, I'll write 2,000 or 3,000 words a day. And sometimes that'll take me 2 or 3 hours. Sometimes that'll take me 8 hours. I kind of write by how fast my deadlines are and how overworked I am. So like, yeah, like I was working pretty fast during that time. I was trying to take December off, so I was probably going 3 or 4 hours a day that week, and then taking time off. I did the BattleTech one in probably 3 or 4 days, and then I did the Shadowrun one in about, so it was about 3.5 days each, 3 or 4 hours a day. And then editing was like, they sent me edits back, and they were pretty light edits, so it was probably like, I got those edits back like Sunday and Monday, so I probably spent about an hour on edits each for them. There was nothing major to edit. It was just like punctuation and stuff. And they were out on time the next week. I did have to help them design a cover, so I did a bunch of approvals on the cover for the BattleTech one. But they already had the cover done for the Shadowrun one, so they were pretty confident I was going to say yes to that. Yeah, that was silly.
Awesome, thanks, Bryan.
Okay, thank you all.